Well, sit children, let me give you the subject of the day.
Welcome everyone. In today's video we'll be seeing who wears the £60 used graphics card crown. You guys asked for it, so backed by popular demand we have Radeon's HD 7950 versus Nvidia's GTX 770. Which of these two cards should you buy on the used market? They both offer similar levels of performance, but the Radeon has an extra gigabyte of VRAM, even though Nvidia's offering gets higher scores on Unigen superposition. In this test we'll be benchmarking their performance on 8 games to see which offers you the best value for today's modern games. In the description I've listed the test system and each game's start time, so if there's a specific game you want to compare you can just skip ahead. As both cards are now at least 4 years old, I would strongly advise overclocking either to gain maximum performance in today's demanding titles. It's free performance for a few minutes work. The Radeon was overclocked to 1150 on the core and 1400 on the memory without any voltage change. Nvidia's GTX 770 was overclocked to 1241 on the core and 3649 on the memory, again without any voltage change. So let the benchmarks begin. First up we have Ark Survival Evolved. This game is notorious for how badly optimised it runs, so to say I wasn't expecting much was an understatement. However, all those regular patches must have done some good as it ran surprisingly smooth on both the Radeon and Nvidia cards. This was run at the medium preset, where the 7950 returned a minimum of 31 and an average of 42 FPS. In an unexpected turn of events, the GTX 770 was able to beat this performance by a healthy margin, returning a minimum of 32 and an average of 49 FPS. Due to the consistently higher frame rate, I felt the performance was considerably smoother on the GTX 770, when in actual fact I'd pegged the Radeon to win this with its larger VRAM. A good start for the 770. Moving on to the much more recent Battlefield 1, both cards are able to run this at ultra settings, although one card was clearly superior to the other as soon as the action hotted up, in this well optimised but demanding title. During heavy explosions, the Radeon soared ahead with its extra gigabyte of VRAM, giving it a clear advantage, with the 770's 2GB of VRAM getting completely saturated and dragging down both its minimum and average FPS. In this title, the GTX 770 was only able to muster an average of 40 frames per second and lows of just 19. In stark contrast, the Radeon excelled in this title with an average of 66 FPS and lows of 46 frames per second. A clear victory for the 7950. Next up we have Doom 2016, another popular title as voted for by you guys, where both cards were given a serious workout on the foundry level. This was run on the high preset with field of vision left at 90 and SMAA anti-aliasing. Apologies for the windowed recording on the Radeon card, it was the only setting that would allow me to capture gameplay footage when using AMD's Relive. But, as you can clearly see, there was a night and day difference between both cards. The Radeon stomped its authority all over the GTX 770, which was yet again struggling with its 2GB frame buffer. You can clearly notice not just the vastly higher frame rate of the Radeon, but also the superior frame timing, which in layman's terms means that there was no stuttering on the Radeon, where the 770 felt a bit ropey at times. The GTX 770 returned an average of 52 FPS, but a pretty low minimum of 38 frames per second. The Radeon turned in a silky smooth performance, with an average of 82 FPS and a minimum of 68 frames per second. Another win for Team Red. Moving on to the popular Bethesda title Fallout 4, I decided to retest both cards as originally was running quite a few mods when first testing the Radeon. But as mentioned on my review of the GTX 770, it really didn't like the mods, which was saturating the VRAM to the point of stutter and low frame drops, down to just 14 frames per second. So on a more level playing field, I ran this game with no modifications at ultra settings, where the Nvidia card picked itself up, dusted itself off and put in a credible performance this time, giving us an average of 74 FPS and a minimum of 52 frames per second. The Radeon was able to match the 770 also, turning in an average of 74 FPS, but unfortunately was hit with a minimum of 46 frames per second. I would call this a narrow win for the GTX 770. Up next we have Mass Effect Andromeda, which I found to be surprisingly demanding. Frankly, neither of these cards were man enough to play this title at high settings without some stuttering or low frame drops, so I was forced to test both at the medium preset. To be honest though, even on the medium preset, this game looks fantastic and is probably at least equal to most games on high settings. Both cards gave very consistent results across the board, with the Nvidia delivering exactly the same results all 3 times. The Radeon was dragged down slightly by one run, which hit a lower minimum than the other two benchmarks. As such, the Radeon delivered an average of 72 FPS and a minimum of 42 frames per second. Nvidia's 770 turned in a stellar performance of 65 FPS average and a minimum of 39 frames per second. However, I'd be extremely hard pressed to tell any difference between the two during actual gameplay, and so the Radeon wins this battle by the slimmest of margins. Shadow of Mordor is likely to be a popular choice for all you guys getting ready in anticipation for the release of Shadow of War later this year. I was once again very impressed that both cards are able to run this title at the very high preset, with fluid gameplay and no stuttering. This game appears to be another title which is extremely well optimised. As this is an Nvidia sponsored title, I was expecting the GTX 770 to turn in a good performance on this title. Thankfully, the GTX 770 didn't disappoint, delivering an average of 73 FPS and a minimum of 56 frames per second. The Radeon turned in a very similar performance with an average of 75 FPS, but a marginally lower minimum of 55 frames per second. Again, I'll be extremely hard pressed to tell any difference between the two during actual gameplay, so we'll call this one a tie. And the moment that some of you guys have been waiting for, up next we have the newest release title, Prey 2017, which is quickly becoming a favourite of many people's, including my own. Judging by some of the other reviews I've seen, although this is an AMD sponsored title, it does appear to run better on Nvidia cards. So let's see if the same is true in this matchup. Both cards run at the very high preset in the Talos lobby area, as this seems to be pretty demanding with all the lighting effects going on when travelling through various sections. The game's performance was practically indistinguishable from either card, where the difference between the two was well within the margin of error. The Radeon clocked in an average of 73 FPS and a minimum of 56 frames per second. Nvidia's GTX 770 dropped just one less frame, on average turning in 72 FPS, but was actually one frame higher on the minimums, dropping to 57 frames per second. To be fair, there was no discernible difference between the two, so I'd call this one a tie as well. And finally we have Titanfall 2, which has run with all the settings on high, with TSAA anti-aliasing and anisotropic filtering times 16. I felt if we pushed any higher on either card, then we would have been well above the VRAM threshold. Field of view was increased to 80, which in my opinion will be what most people will run this title on. Again, this game seems really well optimised for PC. Even a 2nd gen Sandy Bridge i5 plus one of these video cards should give you satisfactory performance at some nice graphical settings. It's worth noting that with Shadowplay engaged, the Nvidia card does appear to run considerably worse. The benchmark figures I'm giving you guys, as always, was without Shadowplay or Relive recording, where the GTX 770 delivered an average of 95 frames per second and a minimum of 80 FPS. Once again, the Radeon was able to surpass the 770, turning in an average of 99 FPS and a minimum of 88 frames per second. Another victory for the HD 7950. Whilst it certainly is true that lowering the settings on some titles would have given Nvidia's GTX 770 a fighting chance, I'm sure that you guys though want to push the maximum out of your £60 card. So the fact that the Radeon is another year older and gave consistently better results on the latest games makes this card still the best bang for your buck at £60 or $75 US. I hope you guys enjoyed this look back at these two older cards on the latest titles. It took me ages to make this video, so if you enjoyed it, show some love and give it a like or share with someone who only has £60 to spend on a new graphics card. Thanks for watching and consider subscribing to the channel, where I'll be doing another popular showdown with some slightly higher tier graphics cards soon. As always, stay passionate about PC, whatever your budget, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode.